Picture the carefree 1950s in America, a time of drive-in movies, sock hops, and a booming Disney empire that specialized in capturing the hearts of families everywhere. In the midst of this sunny landscape rose a young actor named Tommy Kirk, a spirited boy who would go from a struggling family in Louisville, Kentucky, to holding one of the brightest torches among Disney's rising stars. For many of us, the mention of Tommy Kirk brings back memories of tear-jerking cinematic moments, like that infamous ending scene in Old Yeller where heartbreak and heroism collided. Yet the story behind the bright smile and the wide eyes was far more complicated. The boy who could cry on cue for Walt Disney would eventually vanish from the studio's roster, leaving questions in his wake. What caused him to disappear right when he seemed set to flourish in the land of magical kingdoms and devoted fans? And why did so many details about his personal life remain hidden for years? Tommy Kirk was born on December the 10th, 1941, in Louisville, Kentucky, arriving in a household stretched thin by limited resources. He grew up with 3 brothers, but the family often found themselves worrying about essentials, like paying rent and putting food on the table. Times were hard enough that at some point, his parents decided they needed a fresh start. They heard of better prospects in California, as many families did in that era, so they gathered what little they had and set off for the West Coast. No one in the household could have guessed that this move would one day catapult young Tommy into the center of an entertainment revolution. Out in California, the Kirks tried to settle into a new life. Tommy's older brother Joe was bitten by the acting bug first, or at least he thought so. He had big dreams, so he dragged his younger brother along to an audition at the famed Pasadena Playhouse, thinking maybe they could both glean a bit of experience in the local theater scene. Fate can be funny. While Joe was the ambitious one, it was actually Tommy who got cast. The Playhouse gave Tommy a small part, a mere handful of lines and a paycheck of exactly $0. But that gig would become the turning point of his life. One evening, an agent happened to be in the audience. He worked for the Gertz agency, and he saw something in Tommy, some intangible spark, that told him this boy had real screen presence. So without any prior plan on Tommy's part, the agent approached him and offered representation. The next thing Tommy knew, he was trading the spotlight of amateur stage acting for his first taste of TV, a role in a TV Reader's Digest episode called The Last of the Old-Time Shooting Sheriffs. Joe's acting dreams fizzled, and he found himself pivoting to a more practical career in dentistry. Tommy, on the other hand, was on a trajectory that few child actors experience. He wasn't just stepping into the industry, he was bounding. At the time, Walt Disney was building a rapidly expanding empire of wholesome family entertainment. Disney's golden formula revolved around youthful charm, moral clarity, and the innocence of childhood. So they were always on the lookout for bright, all-American youngsters who could win viewers' hearts. Tommy Kirk fit that bill. He was innocent-looking, polite, and had a knack for expressing heartfelt emotion without coming off as phony. So, in 1956, the Mickey Mouse Club tapped him for a series of episodes adapted from the Hardy Boys. He took on the role of Joe Hardy, diving into boyish adventures as if he was truly living them. The show was an instant smash with audiences, thanks to the combination of beloved source material, Disney's production polish, and Kirk's natural ability to sell wonder and curiosity on camera. On the Disney lot, the powers that be quickly recognized that Kirk wasn't just another kid. He was special, especially in one regard: he could cry on cue. While that might sound like a small asset, think of the emotional demands of Disney dramas. The studio was built on stories that tugged at your heart, stirring up tears as well as laughter. A young actor who could genuinely weep in front of a camera without it seeming contrived was a hidden gem. And Disney, always mindful of how to spin gold from talent, decided to test Kirk in a bigger, more emotionally harrowing project. That opportunity arrived in the form of Old Yeller, the story of a boy and his beloved dog set in the frontier days of Texas. Old Yeller was designed as a heartfelt coming-of-age film about loyalty, sacrifice, and heartbreak. When it came time to shoot the infamous final scene, where Kirk's character has to make the unthinkable decision to put his infected dog out of its misery, Kirk delivered a performance that soared beyond Disney's wildest hopes. Generations of viewers would later confess that the end of Old Yeller was among the most traumatic and soul-stirring moments they ever witnessed in a family film. Bill Murray's character in Stripes referenced it, and even characters on the sitcom Friends found themselves emotionally walloped by its raw tragedy. It turned out that, in the realm of tear-jerking cinematic climaxes, Tommy Kirk's Old Yeller finale set a near-unmatched standard. The commercial response to Old Yeller was electrifying. Audiences might have left theaters puffy-eyed, but the box office profit soared. It ranked as the 5th highest-grossing film of 1957, setting Kirk on a path that seemed unstoppable. His career soared to the point that Walt Disney himself reportedly told people that Kirk was his good luck piece. Indeed, whenever Kirk's name was attached, Disney felt assured that families would come out to see the film. However, a young actor's transition from boyhood to adolescence can be tricky to manage, even under the best of circumstances, and Disney noticed a problem. Kirk started looking too thin, all sharp angles and not enough boyish cuteness. While they didn't outright fire him, they put him on hold, evidently wary that his changing appearance might spook audiences used to seeing him as a small, round-cheeked kid. But soon enough, a new production emerged that was perfect for a lanky teenage boy, Swiss Family Robinson. The plot required a family stranded on a tropical island, facing pirates, wild animals, and the raw environment. The crew found the perfect filming location in Tobago, far from Hollywood sets. Being away from the comfort of home was tough for Kirk, but ironically, what he missed most wasn't his parents or siblings. It was the nightlife back in California. Despite his bouts of homesickness, he stuck it out and delivered another strong performance. The film soared, adding another notch in Kirk's belt of Disney hits. As the 1960s approached, Tommy Kirk found himself drifting from one Disney project to the next, sometimes portraying Fred MacMurray's son. Fans might recall a sense of fatherly warmth from MacMurray's on-screen roles, particularly from the sitcom My Three Sons. But in real life, MacMurray was no paternal figure to the increasingly directionless Kirk. On the set of Bon Voyage 1962, MacMurray, who apparently disliked some of Kirk's off-camera antics, scolded him harshly, delivering what Kirk later described as the biggest dressing down of his life. Nor did he find a motherly mentor in his Bon Voyage co-star Jane Wyman, who, according to Kirk, treated him coldly and was downright hostile. Kirk believed he knew the reason. By that point, he was coming to terms with the fact that he was gay, and he suspected Wyman had sensed it too. In a traditional environment, like a 1960s film set, an actor's homosexuality was considered scandalous, something that could sink a career overnight. While Disney had a squeaky clean image, behind the scenes there was a strict, almost oppressive sense of what was considered acceptable moral behavior. Being gay didn't fit the brand. Even so, the studio decided to cast Kirk in a number of teen comedies and adventure flicks. They sent him to Florence for Escapade in Florence, pairing him with Annette Funicello in hopes of fueling tabloid rumors that the two might be an item. The mere hint of romance with Funicello helped maintain the illusion that Kirk was the typical all-American boy. But that charade would inevitably crack. The truth was, Kirk's personal life was on a collision course with Disney's family-friendly standards. Nevertheless, Disney had big plans. They greenlit a sequel to Old Yeller titled Savage Sam, featuring the same family and now a new dog. Hopes were high that lightning would strike again, and audiences would line up to see Kirk's latest big-screen tearjerker. But from the start, savage storms gathered overhead. The film's writer, Fred Gibson, based the story on his own novel. Tragically, the real-life dog that had inspired him was found brutally killed, and Gibson's son, reeling from that horror, took his own life. This heartbreaking backdrop cast a grim pall over the production, and in the end neither critics nor audiences warmed to Savage Sam. It lacked the emotional gut punch of Old Yeller. Some reviews described it as lackluster, and in Disney's eyes, that was a fail for Tommy Kirk. But it wasn't the final strike. The bigger blow came around 1963 or so, when rumors circulated that Kirk, barely in his early 20s, had been involved with a 15-year-old boy. According to the story, someone spotted them together at a public pool. The boy's mother phoned the studio, outraged, and word spread like wildfire. As if that scandal wasn't enough, Kirk admitted that around this time, he was often high on various substances. Between the underage scandal and the drug use, Disney had no choice but to sever ties. Walt Disney himself reportedly ended Kirk's contract, telling him in essence, "We can't have this." That was the abrupt end to what Kirk later called his fairy tale. But in a strange twist of fate, the last film he shot for Disney, The Misadventures of Merlin Jones, also starring Annette Funicello, turned out to be an unexpected success at the box office. Suddenly, the studio realized they could squeeze more profits out of a sequel, The Monkey's Uncle. They grudgingly brought Kirk back for one last gig, hoping to replicate the comedic alchemy. The film also turned a tidy profit, but that was the end of the line. No amount of money was going to make them keep an actor they deemed too controversial. Once Tommy Kirk walked off that set, he would never return to the Magic Kingdom. With the Disney door slammed shut, Kirk scrambled for new roles. He found some at American International Pictures, often alongside Annette Funicello again, but in a different brand of film. The 1960s popularized a wave of so-called beach party flicks, a mix of music, surfing, romance, and teen hijinks. Titles like Pajama Party, The Ghost in the Invisible Bikini, It's a Bikini World, and Catalina Caper offered Kirk a steady paycheck and let him preserve some semblance of stardom. But these were a far cry from the clean Disney adventures. The vibe was all about teens in skimpy outfits, comedic misunderstandings, and mild rebelliousness. Perhaps it felt liberating to Kirk, yet trouble seemed to follow him like a shadow. In 1964, Kirk attended a Christmas party that took a disastrous turn. Police arrived, found him with marijuana, then searched his car and discovered sedatives. Though the charges were partially dropped because the sedatives were prescription, Kirk's squeaky clean image was in tatters. The fallout was swift. He lost roles in the pipeline, including 3 separate projects. One in particular, The Sons of Katie Elder, starring none other than John Wayne, was a major missed opportunity for him to pivot into serious adult roles. Without that stepping stone, Kirk slid further down the rung of industry respect. He picked up smaller, mostly forgettable parts, sometimes diving into an endless loop of beachy teen flicks that soon fell out of favor. In desperation, he took questionable gigs that cost him membership in the Screen Actors Guild, effectively barring him from mainstream film projects. The downward spiral accelerated in the early 1970s. With few legitimate offers, Kirk wrestled with depression. He'd already been dabbling in drugs, but the new wave of rejections and isolation pushed him toward heavier abuse. He came perilously close to overdosing. No one from the studio system was stepping in to save him. He had no real father figure, no motherly co-star offering compassion. He was on his own. By 1973, he had to swallow his pride and work as a waiter to make ends meet. He also drove as a chauffeur, picking up people who may or may not have recognized him as that sweet boy from Old Yeller a decade before. It was a crushing blow. That same year, he decided to come out publicly in an interview with journalist John Carman. It was a bold move for the era. Homosexuality was still deemed taboo in show business, at least if you were open about it, and numerous gay actors hide their sexuality for fear of being blacklisted. So Kirk's announcement more or less signaled to the entertainment industry that he wasn't planning to hide anymore. The film dried up almost completely. It wasn't as though he had any illusions about forging a path as a gay leading man in the early 1970s. Instead, he turned his attention to local musical theater in Kentucky, starring in productions like Hello, Dolly and Little Mary Sunshine. That shift gave him a chance to reclaim some of the joy he once felt on stage, albeit on a smaller scale and for significantly less money. He eventually managed to pick up minor roles in low-budget exploitation films, like 1988's Streets of Death, a grimy, disturbing story involving snuff films. Kirk, ironically, was the only professional actor on set. Watching the film, one can sense how far he'd fallen from the bright lights of Disney. Yet his devotion to the craft remained. He tried to bring sincerity to even the most questionable projects. By the turn of the millennium, Kirk's IMDb roster showcased a parade of forgettable titles like Billy Frankenstein or The Education of a Vampire. Each new role slid further under the radar, leaving him financially strapped. In 1990, he admitted to being poor, but he wasn't resentful. He pivoted again, this time opening a carpet cleaning business called Tommy Kirk's Carpet and Upholstery. For years, it seemed as though Disney had collectively forgotten him. But in 2006, the studio turned around and honored him as a Disney legend. Surrounded by his former co-stars, including Kevin Corcoran, who'd played his brother in Old Yeller and Swiss Family Robinson, Kirk was formally acknowledged for his contributions to the House of Mouse. Some might think he would meet this gesture with bitterness, considering how they'd abandoned him in his youth. Surprisingly, he showed nothing but gratitude. He told Disney that he hoped fans would remember him for the old classics, specifically Swiss Family Robinson and Old Yeller. It was clear that, for all the pain and heartbreak, the young boy who cried on cue still cherished those memories. In 2017, at age 76, Tommy Kirk appeared on a radio show and dropped another bombshell. He claimed he wasn't strictly gay but bisexual, saying he had relationships with both women and men. Whether that was a private truth he'd discovered or something that changed over time, it added a fresh layer of complexity to an already complicated personal story. Just 4 years later, on September 28th, 2021, a neighbor found Kirk's body in his Las Vegas apartment. He had died at 79, and the news was heartbreaking to those who recalled him as the wide-eyed kid from so many beloved Disney adventures. A longtime friend and fellow child actor, Paul Peterson, took to social media to break the news. He wrote that Tommy Kirk loved his fans deeply, but Peterson revealed something else as well. Kirk had been estranged from his family, likely because of his orientation. That detail explained why Kirk had so desperately sought father figures on set, and why losing the paternal closeness he'd imagined with Fred McMurray stung so badly. When Kevin Corcoran, the on-screen brother he so often teamed up with, reflected on Kirk, he spoke not of bitterness but affection, saying Kirk was a fantastic talent. Even though Corcoran used to give Kirk a hard time, Kirk never held it against him. So in many ways, that sibling bond on screen mirrored a genuine familial tie behind the camera, or at least as close to real family as Kirk could get. A final touching example of his found family came in 1994 when Kirk reconnected with Beverly Washburn, who had played his neighbor in Old Yeller. Though it had been decades, they rekindled a warm friendship. It's poignant to think that the film that made him a star also provided a wellspring of lifelong connections. In the end, for someone cast aside by Hollywood, and even by his own kin, forging personal bonds with his old co-stars became a way of finding peace and acceptance. Tommy Kirk's journey, then, is a tapestry woven from early stardom, secret burdens, heartbreak, and small triumphs. It's the story of a child idol whose talent made Disney millions, but whose private life was deemed unacceptable by the moral gatekeepers of the age. The scandal of being gay or bisexual collided with the strict norms of 1960s Hollywood, derailing a career that might otherwise have soared. He stumbled deeper into trouble with drugs, losing major opportunities, and even risking his membership in the Screen Actors Guild. He weathered humiliation, served tables, chauffeured strangers, and eventually declared his truth for the world to hear, knowing it would cost him whatever remained of his mainstream film prospects. Yet, as tarnished as his career became, the emotional resonance of those early films endured. People who see Old Yeller as kids today still tear up at that final shot of Kirk's face, contorted by sorrow as he does what must be done for his rabid dog. That performance, so seared into cinema's memory, remains a testament to his extraordinary gifts. And who can watch Swiss Family Robinson without smiling at the siblings' resourcefulness or their attempts to outsmart pirates? A huge part of that film's charm is Kirk's enthusiasm. Even if the real Tommy Kirk behind the scenes was struggling, we can't deny that what ended up on screen was remarkable. When Disney welcomed him back as a legend, it felt like a circle closing, albeit a somewhat forced or belated gesture of acknowledgement. For Tommy Kirk, it was a moment of recognition that, yes, he had left an indelible mark on the studio that shaped him. And ironically, it was that same studio that cast him out when his private reality clashed with the illusions they sold to the public. By the time he passed away in 2021, Tommy Kirk had mostly retreated into quiet anonymity, living in Las Vegas, occasionally checking in with fans or acquaintances from his earlier days. The heartbreak of being disowned by his biological family lingered, yet he found a sense of belonging with co-stars who remembered him not as a scandal, but as a friend. He even found acceptance from fans who never forgot those childhood roles that had made him a staple of weekend matinees and living room television reruns. His life, in many ways, exemplifies the clash between personal identity and Hollywood's veneer. Yet it's also a testament to perseverance, the ability to keep forging ahead even if it means cleaning carpets for a living when the industry door slams shut. If there's a poignant lesson in Tommy Kirk's story, it might be that the child star experience can be as fleeting as it is spectacular. One moment, you're the cute face that enthralls millions, netas. The next, your personal life, your orientation, or your aging features can shove you into the shadows. Kirk was a prime example of how quickly fortunes can change. He soared with Disney, but then fell with an equally swift crash. Even more tragically, he lacked the family support that might have softened the blow. Instead, he endured condemnation at a time when alternative sexualities were neither publicly understood nor accepted. In the years since, Hollywood has taken strides, though certainly not perfect or uniform, toward greater inclusivity. One wonders, if Tommy Kirk had been born decades later, would his story have looked different? For better or worse, Tommy Kirk was, In 1950s and 1960s America, the earnest face that drew tears from audiences who saw him shoot Old Yeller, the teenage adventurer swinging from treehouses in Swiss Family Robinson, and the comedic sidekick in fluffy Disney romps. That legacy endures, overshadowing the tragedies of substance misuse, heartbreak, and family estrangement. Because in the end, movie lovers often choose to see their favorite stars frozen in time. A bright-eyed kid who bravely did what had to be done, or a resourceful teen building a raft to fight pirates. Yet behind those freeze frames lay a human being who struggled, erred, and eventually found a small measure of grace. That's likely why fans rallied around him when the sad news of his death spread. People recalled the wonder he brought into their childhoods and lamented that he'd had to face so many hardships alone. Paul Peterson's final tribute to Kirk highlights how profoundly isolation can wound a person, forced out by his sexuality, misunderstood by co-stars, cast aside by the studio that once adored him, and abandoned by the family that might have provided unconditional love. The heartbreak of that reality makes you appreciate how vital found families, like old colleagues or supportive fans, can be. The bittersweet note is that in his final years, Tommy Kirk remained kind, as if he refused to let bitterness take over. He had every reason to scorn the system that had built him up and then tossed him aside, yet by all accounts he never did. He even expressed pride and gratitude about his Disney years, telling us he'd prefer to be remembered for Swiss Family Robinson and Old Yeller. Maybe that was his way of preserving the best parts of his youth, the golden moments untouched by scandal or heartbreak. For fans, it's a relief to know that he didn't carry resentment to his grave, that he found some measure of peace, even if that involves stepping away from the spotlight. So, here we are, many decades past the era when Tommy Kirk was the golden child of Walt Disney Studios. The story of his life lingers as a testament to how success in Hollywood can slip away in an instant, especially when real humanity collides with illusions of perpetual innocence. Kirk was a real person behind wide, earnest eyes, a complicated and sometimes troubled soul who ended up leading a life far more dramatic than any Disney script. Perhaps that's the real reason we keep telling his story. It's both a cautionary tale and an ode to a talent that shone bright, even if fleetingly. If you revisit Old Yeller, you may see it with fresh eyes now, knowing that behind the tears on screen was a boy wrestling with secrets he couldn't share. You might marvel at how convincingly he displayed anguish for a fictional dog, only to endure real anguish in the tabloids for a lifestyle that still struggles for acceptance in certain parts of the world. Watch Swiss Family Robinson, and you might sense the homesickness that gnawed at him on that toboggan set, the longing for the nightlife and the freedom he yearned for in California. But also notice the spark of joy in his face as he leaps into jungle adventures, that absolute boyish exuberance shining through. For a moment, the camera captured him free of the burdens off stage. Hollywood can be cruel, especially to child actors who become entangled in a swirl of conflicting expectations. Yet the magic can be real too. For a while, Tommy Kirk was that piece of magic for audiences, embodying the pure, emotional resonance that only a kid can bring to the screen. Perhaps in that sense, he did precisely what he was born to do, to imprint on our memories an image of youthful sincerity and a tear that changed how we see heartbreak in family films. And so, if you find yourself wanting to see more stories like his, tales of hope, heartbreak, rise and fall, subscribe, hit that like button, and stay tuned. Tommy Kirk's journey stands as a deeply human reflection on the highs and lows of fame, on the cost of secrets in an unforgiving industry, and on the power of forging your own peace when the rest of the world decides you no longer fit the picture. Perhaps the greatest takeaway is that even after the final credits roll, life continues messy and complicated. But sometimes, if we're lucky, with a small redemption that helps us walk forward without regret. And if you do recall Tommy Kirk whenever you see that old Disney logo shimmering at the start of a classic film, don't forget, behind the legend was a real man whose biggest dream was simply to be himself, whether in the warm glow of the spotlight or in the quieter corners of life he found later on. May he rest knowing his story won't be forgotten.